There is a Gemara, a statement in the Gemara that captured my attention for much of the last year, and I think tonight is a celebration of its message. It's an account by Rabbi Yehuda in his time studying under the leadership of Rabbi Meir. And he says, Hai dimhadadna mi havrai dehazite de Rabbi Meir me'achorai ve'ilu hazite mikame have mehadavna tfe tichtiv vehayu einecha ro'ot et morecha. He testifies that part of his skill in reasoning, his ability to study and to reason with precision, came from the fact that he got to study in close proximity to Rabbi Meir. In contrast, others may have only learnt the teachings, but not have merited to study so close. Except, there was still something missing. And that was that because of his ranking, he didn't get to see his rabbi in the face. He was in close proximity, but he sat behind. And so he didn't get to see the nuances in body language and facial expression and non-verbal behavior that could have imparted so much more. Had I got to study in front of his face, had I got to see his face clearly, I'd have been even sharper. And when I think of what we lost in the last year and a half, in terms of Torah study, the opportunity to be close to our teachers, to see them face to face, to learn from them in their presence and in their close proximity. And I think tonight is a celebration of our ability to do that. Rabbi Dweck, since I came on in 2017, spoke here every year except for the last. Which is, we're just really happy that you're here tonight and happy to hear from you.
Thank you. With the permission of the rabbis, I want to thank you all so much for being here this evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Ethan Marcus. I'm here on behalf of the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America, the national umbrella organization for the Ladino-speaking Turkish and Greek communities of the United States. And we're really honored and privileged to be in partnership this evening with Magen David, who was graciously partnered with us to use a beautiful sanctuary for this evening's program, along with Kihila Kadosha Yanina Synagogue and Museum, the Greek Jewish synagogue on the Lower East Side of Broome Street. Tonight, as many of you know already, we have a very, very special guest, one man who certainly needs no introduction, Rabbi Joseph Dweck, who is the senior rabbi of the S&P Sephardi community of UK. Really honored and privileged to have him here in person for this special event. We've had him for a number of occasions through what we're calling the Sephardic Digital Academy, National Online Academy of Sephardic Torah, Halakha, Philosophy, Teshuvot, Ladino language and culture, Sephardic cooking. So I encourage you all to see some of the previous classes we've done with Rabbi Dweck. It's truly inspirational, and we're just so honored to have him with us tonight. A few quick notes. Rabbi Dweck himself is here from the UK, but he's done a lot of incredible work recently, mostly with his podcast, which you should certainly check out, as well as new works with the Habura, which is a new program through the S&P in partnership with the Montefiore Endowment, which I encourage you all also to check out as well in partnership with the Sephardic Digital Academy. I won't take up any more time. Please enjoy the shiur and hold questions to the end. Is that correct? Great. Rabbi Dweck, l'chavo.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Thank you, Ethan. I want to thank Ethan very much because Ethan invited me to present tonight. He heard that I was going to be. I'm here for a wedding, a close Talmid. And it's an opportunity to be able to share some Torah thoughts with everyone. on. So I want to thank Ethan for that. I want to thank, again, David, my cousin Dookie, and Albert, the committee, the synagogue for welcoming me and for providing us this space and opportunity. And I want to thank Rabbi Maman for giving me the pulpit, right, for this brief period of time. Thank you for your very kind words. I didn't realize that. That's every year, except last. So maybe it's a hazakah. I have to keep that up now. And I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. I have to say, I'm a bit rusty, I think. It's been a while since I've spoken in person, in front of real 3D people. So it's a tremendous honor. When we were talking about, Ethan and I were talking about what should we discuss tonight, he said, something Sephardi. I said, yeah, I'm Sephardi. Whatever I say is going to be Sephardi. But we went back and forth, and I thought, what are people thinking about? What is pressing? What is on the front of the collective minds, especially of the young people of our nation, of our Am? In my experience, the limited experience that I have as a rabbi, I've been a rabbi for 25 years, and I am constantly thinking on, concerned about, interested in what is happening with our young adults. That doesn't mean that I'm not interested in what is going on with our old adults or middle-aged adults or even children. I am, but I am looking carefully at the young adults. Their mindset, their issues, their difficulties are pivotal to the entire demographic. And in my experience lately I will say in the last 10 years or so, it is getting more pronounced, is simply the question of religion in our lives, and for that matter in our world. What was treated almost as matter of fact for my parents, my grandparents, even for me and my generation, I dare say is not considered matter of fact by many of those who are a generation below and further. And that is the place of religious life, right? And for us, of course, we're talking about Judaism, right? What does my Judaism mean to me? What place does it hold in my life, in light of all the other things that I experience in my life? What it is that I'm going to choose as an individual, how it is that I'm going to build myself in this world as an individual. There are many components to my experience, my living, the tapestry of my life. How many of those threads, what integrity of that fabric is going to be governed by my religious life? With me? That's the question. So I call this, how do we live a life in a post-religious world? Which I made an assumption there. Few people asked me, what are you speaking about tonight? I told them this. They said, what's post-religious? And those were younger people. Which means it's kind of like the fish swimming in the water, you know? And an older fish swims by and say, hey boys, how's the water? And they swim on, and one of the younger fish turns to the other and says, what's water? You're just in it. What does post-religious mean? When you're an older generation and you're looking at this one, you won't know what post-religious is. When you're living in this generation, and this is yours, post-religious is not a word. It's just how you're living. You don't know that it's post-religious. What I mean by that is a world in which the place of religion no longer holds the centrality it once did for hundreds of years, thousands even, before it. What that means is that today, just a few steps outside our communities, right, because we're coming from Jewish communities, and with that I will even say, we don't speak very much about it within the communities because we are in the community. But if you step out into the broad Western world of today's young adults and youth, religion is not overwhelmingly, I'm not saying that no one thinks about it. There are still young people becoming priests, becoming rabbis. Thank goodness that's happening. But overwhelmingly, in the West, religion is not central. Not only is it not central, for most, it isn't even relevant. It's not considered. And that cannot be going on en masse in the Western world and not have impact in our communities. Especially today, when devices like this are in everyone's hands, and they are genuinely portals to the entire world directly. So my question is, an important one. If what I am saying is even somewhat true, our religious lives are in an endangered space in a way that they have never been before. Yes? So the question is, how do we deal with that? I'm not going to be so presumptuous to stand here as a prophet, which I am not, and say, well, this is how it is that we are going to deal with this. It is a more complex problem than I will be able to present here to you tonight. I'm not going to be so presumptuous to stand here and say, these are the steps, follow steps 1, 2, and 3, and everybody will be fine. It is more complex than that. It is stronger than that. What I will attempt to do tonight is offer a way, an approach, in broad strokes, because we've only got about an hour. And I'm going to suggest 3 points as principles. What I mean by that is not steps of action per se, but principles to consider as to how they might reframe, reshape. And when I say which means in a different way than it was, I'm borrowing that. I don't think that this is new. I think the principles that I will present tonight are principles that are meant to, that are set in to ensure the longevity, viability, survival, movement of our people through time. All of it. We've survived this far. So, without further delay, the principles. I questioned into what order I should present these principles. And I'm not sure this is the best one, so bear with me. And if you think it's not the best one, tell me, because I may give this talk again. I'll have to switch it up. The 3 principles I will say now, and then we'll go into them. The first is covenant. For the Jewish people, covenant, berit, is the center stone. It is the foundation stone of everything that we are and do. Without the concept of berit, of covenant, there is nothing to discuss. Now, I will say before I move forward, when I say how are we going to deal with our religious lives and so on, I mean how are we going to maintain it without fundamentally changing it, without tearing it down and rebuilding it again from scratch, without completely dismantling it and making it something other than what it was. By holding its core principles, how do we move forward? I think that's a very important point about what it is that I want to put forward. So 3, number 1, covenant. Number 2, that it is important for us to recognize that God, when we talk about God, I say we, I mean the Jewish people, I'm not talking about anybody else, I'm talking about us tonight, right? When we, the Jewish people, talk about God, we are talking about the source of all things. Everything that is. If you want to localize it, the universe. Being that that's the case, we see. And when I say we, there I will say, this is not unique to Sephardim, but it is profoundly central to the way Sephardim have engaged in the world, and that is that the world is not just a creation of God, but an expression of God. What's the difference? A creation of God can be utilitarian. Which means God could put things together and say, here's your world, and nothing in it necessarily would express the maker. It would be utilized for its particular purposes, but I wouldn't necessarily see the soul, so to speak, of the maker in it. Similar to that, the way I might see the expression of an artist in an artist's work. An author in an author's work. A musician in a musician's work. You get to know the artist even without meeting the artist directly, through their expressions. Yes? To say that the world is an expression of God is to say that God is known through the creation. Through his work, you know him. That's number 2. Number 3 is innovation. Innovation. To respond to what is new with new. Now, even though Solomon said, "In kol hadash tachat hashemesh," there's nothing new under the sun, of course, we recognize that he's talking about in the ultimate sense. Right? No matter what it is that we experience, is a reconfiguration of whatever it is that we already have. I mean, we started with stars, right? And stars collapse. And there's fusion. And then you get elements. But they were always there. I mean, you start, it's just a question of what's the configuration. So you and I are stardust, ultimately. As with everything else. That's what Shlomo HaMelech means. There's nothing new. Ultimately, it's all just reconfigurations. But we will recognize the new configurations as new. And what does one do with new? One must be new. In the new. That's what we call innovation. Those are the 3 principles. I will suggest that in broad strokes, those 3 principles stand. They help us stand through all things. Even what it is we're dealing with today. In what particular ways, that I leave open. Happy to discuss further. We're not talking about details, we're talking about principles tonight, which is something that I like to talk about. I like talking about principles. Principles is teach a man to fish, rather than give a man fish. Yeah? Okay. So the first concept is with regards to brit, is with regards to covenant. Covenant means that there is a pact, an agreement, of a particular commitment of action and framework of living. That's what a covenant is. Yeah? There's an agreement, 2 sides, to engage in a mutual endeavor that is governed by basic rules, points, and it's held as long as the covenant is meant to be. If you think about it, for God to do that is a little bit strange. Why? Because this. If God is who we say he is, which is the first entity, and by first I mean like really first, yeah, nothing before it. Whatever it is that thing must be, yeah, it must be infinite. It must be, without limits, one, and all of that. We're not going to get into that now. One thing that I recognize is that if it's first, then by definition, there is nothing before it, which means that that entity is not motivated by external forces. Yeah? Which also means that nothing could motivate God to do anything. So when I say, why did God X? It's really a problematic question. You go, well, what do I mean by that? Why did he? Why might presuppose what was the motivating factor for God to do X? Well, that's a wrong question. There is no motivating factor for God to do anything because he's God. If there was a motivating factor that motivated God, the motivating factor would be God, not God. We call the motivating factor God. You with me? If that's the case, then God doesn't do anything for any reason. Rambam writes this explicitly in the Moreh Nebuchim. He's a Sephardi. So there we go. Check. What we mean when we say that, obviously, for borrowing terms, is what was God's aim? It's spontaneous. There's nothing moving him, but now that he's doing it, what's he doing? That's really what it is. Right? What's he doing? Okay. What that means is that God is utterly free. There is no encumbering whatever on him. Which also means, brace yourselves, that he's unreliable. Because at any moment he could change his mind with no penalties. You know who knew this? Bilam knew this. But we're not talking about Parashat Bilam tonight. I'm just putting that in your pockets. You can hold that till next week. And wonder why. Read the story. Bilam knows this. He has no problems with God changing his mind. He doesn't assume that it's strange in any way, shape, or form. Just because he said something yesterday doesn't mean he shouldn't say something else today. Well, that's fundamentally the way that it is. So God's utterly free. You understand what covenant means for God? It means that he is voluntarily, if he enters into covenant voluntarily, which he would have to, it means that he is voluntarily encumbering himself, committing himself to a particular mode of action in this particular engagement. It is why, as far as Torah is concerned, even for the world to be the world, for it to survive, for God to care about this little planet, he had to enter into covenant. It's a strange thing. Everybody's got a flood story, right? Gilgamesh? Covenant? Not in all of them. The Torah's relating of the flood story ends in covenant. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Noah, after Noah brings this, whatever he brings, this offering, you know what, Noah? Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do this again. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a covenant and force myself not to do it again. I'm going to put a little rainbow in the sky so that you know that I've done this. Clouds and things, pretty things. My bow, right? Kashti, it says. You're going to see my bow in the sky. That's how you'll know. I have a rainbow bow in the sky. And that is how you will know I will not do. There are going to be seasons, non-stop. The earth's going to turn. Now, according to the Hahamim, that was really important because as far as the Hahamim are concerned, God was creating and destroying worlds all the time. Couldn't rely on him to get a world going. As a matter of fact, before the flood, couldn't rely on him to get a world going. Parashat Bereshit, the opening thing, the opening chapter of the book, doesn't close until the entire thing crashes and burns. You notice this? It's because HaTorah. You don't pay attention. Everybody's really the dance. We'll read the parasha. The parasha is so exciting. Bereshit bara Elohim t'shamayim ha'aretz. Day 1, day 2. It's this epic. We don't realize by the end of the parasha, the whole thing is a disaster. The whole project falls apart. God's ready to scrap the entire thing. That's the opening story. The opening story is don't rely on God to create a world because when he doesn't like it, it's going out. So what is he? He puts himself into binds out of care to commit. And so that happens for the Am. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, look, Abraham, I love you. Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves Abraham? Not for tonight. What I will point out is that it doesn't give any reason in the Torah. He just falls in love with Abraham. Okay? And you and your kids after them, I am committing. I am forcing myself into a pact of love. And it is all love. It's Abraham Habi, Abraham my beloved. Bilam, who is ready to use the unpredictable God to curse Israel, who had a perfect record. Balak says to him, he goes, look, I know you have a perfect record. Every single person, every single time that you're hired to bless someone, they're blessed. You hired to curse someone, they're cursed. You're very expensive because you have such a good record. I'm willing to pay you top dollar. Please curse this people for me because everything else that's been tried isn't working. So Balaam says, look, we're going to kind of gauge God and see what his mood is because he's moody. I'm sure. What I mean by by that. It's not, don't mean that disrespectfully, right? The Gemara says that Kadosh Baruch Hu's mood shifts, and he gets angry randomly. And it's hard to tell. The only one who was able to tell was Balaam when God was upset. Because, why? Because Balaam was open to the moods of God. He didn't need God to be in a consistent mood. Of course, when we say mood, we're borrowing it, because God doesn't have moods, but we're talking about in our experience. So Balaam wanted to use that. What he didn't account for was that God had already entered into covenant with this people. So later on in Sefer Devarim, when Moshe is telling the story over to the people again, because remember, it's the one parasha in the Torah, Parashat Balak, where the people are completely oblivious to what's going on. They're not even central to the story. They're on the side. They're in the background. Balak and Balaam are the center characters over there. What does Moshe say to them when he tells it over to them later on, before he dies? He says, you should have really been blown to smithereens by what Balaam was about to do to you. He was going to curse you. And you know why it didn't work? Your God, your Lord, he didn't want to listen to Balaam. You know why? Because he loves you. Because he loves you, he locked himself in. As we often do for love. I mean, we just mimic. Imitatio Deus. We imitate God. We lock ourselves in. For love. Oftentimes. So why am I presenting this to you? Because I'm saying, look at what the principles are that Torah teaches us in terms of what it means to be us. We have accepted that the creator of the universe, utterly free, entirely open, locked himself into rules for love. Think about the implications. Think about a people that live their lives based on that concept, on that idea. That for 3,000 years, that has been in the heart, the collective heart of our nation. That the Lord God locked himself in to covenant of love with our people. What does that mean? This is why I'm using it as the first point tonight. Listen to what that means. It means that every one of the members of that family are precious. That they are part of that pact. And that the nature of it is not fundamentally philosophical. It is not even fundamentally legal. Those are major layers of the dynamics of the covenant. But the covenant itself, the bedrock of the covenant, is the family of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. If you are born into that family, if that is who you are, that's the bottom line. And nothing can tear that asunder. Contrary to what many people might have us believe. It cannot be broken. That's the meaning of covenant. Not God and not Israel can break that covenant. I would say it has not been broken for over 3,000 years. So I want to show you examples of this from what the Hahamim say. I put to you on number 1 and number 2 and 3 the statements of covenant. The first one is with Abraham Avinu himself. God is talking to Abraham, and he says to him in Bereshit Yud Zayin, Genesis 17, I will uphold my covenant between me and you, Abraham. Ben zar'acha harecha, and your seed after you. The Dorotam, for all their generations. The Brit Olam, an eternal covenant. Liot lecha Elohim, so that I can be for you a God. Ul zaracha harecha, and to your children after you. One of the signs of that covenant is the land that I will give you. It's later stated to the nation before Moshe dies, collectively. It is accepted by the nation at Sinai. It's signed in blood. I mean, Moses literally has buckets of blood that he sprinkles upon the people. This is the nitty-gritty, messy, earthy elements of human life that we're talking about over here. We're not talking about some esoteric metaphysical ideas. We are talking about being. We are talking about humans. We are talking about life. It is in the blood that it is expressed. And Moshe says to the people, at the end of the Sefer, you're standing here, all of you, before the Lord your God. Your heads, your leaders, from the top to the bottom of the society. Everyone is here. You are now entering fully the covenant of the Lord your God and his vow. That God is cutting with you today. He's establishing it, carving it out for you today. Why? Not because I want to hold you, not because I want to force you, not because I want you to jump through hoops for me. Because I love you, and this is a relationship. So that he will establish you today as a nation to him, and he will be a God to you. This is relationship we're talking about over here. What are the implications of that? Take a look at number 4. Well, what if there's a member of the family? What if there's a member of the familial nation that just doesn't hold from any of it? Rejects the law, the philosophy. Is it desirable? Well, absolutely not. Of course not. It goes without saying. Are there penalties? Sure. Punishments even? Yes. Is the deal off for that person? No. Are they out of the covenant? No. Yisrael mumar. A Yisrael who mumar means a Yisrael who rejects the principles, the ideas. Shekidesh, who wanted to marry and married, right? What does it mean, Kiddush? Gave value, thing of value in front of witnesses and so on. Said Hare'at Mekudesh to another member of Israel, or vice versa. She accepted. She's the mumar. Well, if they're not part of the covenant anymore, it shouldn't hold, right? They're not part of it. No, Israel mumar shekidesh kiddushav kiddushin gemurim. There is not even a question that, of course, the marriage is a marriage. Now, consider, right? You know what we've got to do when a marriage is desired with someone outside the nation. Oh my gosh. First of all, it's a question as to whether we should even consider it, so on and so forth. And then all that. What if they convert? Okay, what do you got to do? There's a whole ordeal that a person's got to go through. The person that we're talking about could believe in nothing. Marry them, no questions asked. Further, Sanhedrin, Hata Yisrael. What if the nation is a sinning nation? What if the whole nation can't get it together? They're falling apart. The majority of the nation isn't holding from the philosophies and the mitzvot anymore. Hata Yisrael Amar Bi Abba Bar Zabdaf Ad Pishe Hata Yisrael. Any member? People, even though they have sinned, they've gone against it, they are once and always Israel. Amar bi Abba Hainu de Amrinshe Asade Kai Bnei Hilfa Asa Shameh Ba'asa Karule. It's like people say, myrtle found among thorns. Its name is myrtle, and it's called myrtle. What does it mean? It doesn't matter what it's found in, where you find it. It is what it is. It is what it is. It never changes. I would say, okay, well, that's very nice for people in the family. What about people that are outside the family, who decide they want to become part of the family? That's what we call converting. Yeah, well, you know what happens, as far as we're concerned, when a person converts. It's more than just the principles and ideas and laws that person is taking on. As a matter of fact, the halachas, they don't even have to know all the laws before they come. Today, we usually make them know all the laws. There's a reason for that. But on the books, they don't even have to know all the laws. They don't even have to know all the principles. They just have to know basic, some severe laws, some light laws, some of the basic principles, and they have to accept upon themselves what? To be part of the nation. They go into the mikveh. You know what happens when they go into that mikveh? As far as we're concerned, again, their biological connections to their previous family dissolve in that mikveh. They are no longer family in the eyes of Jewish law to their previous family. To the point that if a brother and sister convert, they are no longer brother and sister, and in the eyes of the Torah, if they wanted to marry, they could. What we say is, better not to do that. The optics aren't great. So the Hahamim say it's not a good idea. But the law, and why is that? Why? Because this is a question about family. They come into our family now. They're not part of the previous family. Legally, logistically. So you look at number 8, Taval Be'ala, a person goes into a mikveh, converting, he comes out of the mikveh, Hareu ki Yisrael lechol devarav. That person is a member of our nation for all purposes. Why are you telling me this? That if a person went back on his desire to convert and become a Yisrael and decided not to act as a Yisrael anymore, but he wants to marry a Jewish woman, no problem. This is nuts! Are you with me? Do you see this is nuts? It's nuts. But it's reiterated over and over and over again. This pasuk in Vayikra, number 6. It says you have to do kapara for the Ohel Moed. Right? It's talking about cleansing the purity, the impurity of Ohel Moed, of the tent of meeting in the Mishkan. You know, the Mishkan in which God rests among them in their impurities. That's the pasuk. He lives with them in their filth, which was a negotiation of Moshe. Moshe tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he goes, look, you can't be up there in the ivory tower. You have to be down here in the mud with us. HaKadosh says, okay, I'll do that too. It's not enough that I bound myself into covenant. I'm going to bind myself into the mud with you. Wherever you go, I'm going to be with you. Says the Hahamim on that, he lives with them in their filth. Even though they are impure. The divine presence is within them. Why am I saying this to you? Think about the implications of this. What is the mindset around this? The mindset around this is that it is special. That no matter what it is that a person does, we teach them, maybe even reprimand them, maybe even punish them depending on the systems. We never reject them. We always hold them in. Because that is the fundamental nature of the endeavor. I believe that is more important today than ever before. Because if what's happening is happening, as I've explained it at the beginning, is it not important to remember that Israel, afal pi shehata Yisrael, and that what we must remember that and act in line with that and question always, how do I hold my family? Sometimes hard measures have to be issued in family endeavors. Sometimes discipline isn't pretty. Those things may be. But we must always remember that part. That's fundamental. I have seen far too many times in my career people rejected, utterly rejected, for far less than any of this. So that is the first tenet. That it's a matter of mindset and approach. What does my people mean to me? And what does this relationship with God mean to me? And I'm going to say something that I think is extremely important to pay attention to. And this sometimes I say ad nauseum, because I will say, and I'm not hesitant to say, that to me, myself, this is one of the most powerful elements of my faith. That I'm watching the people of Israel 4,000 years later from Abraham Avinu, which is really, it's crazy that we can even say that. There's something here that needs to be acknowledged. That it should not be that we are sitting here in a synagogue in the middle of downtown, New York City, thinking about our covenant. 4,000 years after Abraham is on the earth. It's astonishing. I believe the biggest miracle our people has ever seen. We've seen crazy things. So when you look back and you say, well, look, I don't know, covenant, not sure, I don't know, but look, we're here. You can explain it however it is that you wish to. But this is something that we spoke out from the very beginning. We said, we're in it for the long haul. And here we are. Here we are. We're in it for the long haul. So it's not something that should be treated lightly. The berit, the covenant, should not be treated lightly by us. And what I mean by that, not just in terms of our adherence to it, but how is it we treat the other members in it. Be careful. Harambam writes this as well. He says, look what happened to the people who spoke poorly about Israel. And I'm talking about the big people like Eliyahu and Nabi. God was not pleased that he was criticizing them, even though he might have been right. He got fired for that. The Kadosh Baruch Hu said, look, Eliyahu, I hear you. I don't want you talking about my people like that. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to resign. And please get your student Elisha to fill your place. He'll do it. Harambam gives several examples of that. Don't speak poorly about the people. You certainly do not reject them out of hand. That's one. Why? Because the basis is love. That's why. Love doesn't mean blindness, doesn't mean indifference. To the contrary, it means the opposite. It means caring about everything and everyone, very specifically. That's the first thing. The second two are philosophical. So once we rise up from the core, human, familial, human being aspects, the love aspects, there are two basic philosophical points which help us deal with the world. And the first one, like I said, is that we see the world as an expression of God. Included in that is that we see history as an expression of God. So it's not just the extant universe, which is constantly expanding, which we now know, and therefore changing. It's the events on earth. It's the unfoldings. It's the direction of these events that are powered by that source. And so I hear people all the time say, oh, the world, it's such a horrible state. Oh my gosh, the world today. Oh, it used to be. This selective nostalgia that we have. Zacharnu et hadaga. The Torah teaches us also about that. Don't be selectively nostalgic. Who was it that said, I think it was Yogi Berra who said nostalgia is not what it used to be? That's the point of Bnei Israel. That's that point where Bnei Israel are, they're reported in Torah as saying, we remember the great stuff we had in Egypt. What? The cucumbers? You forgot about the slavery part, right? And the taskmasters. No, but the cucumbers were great. Add a little salt on those, Maybe some onion and garlic. There was sometimes some fish that we got, thrown at us. Scraps of fish, like the jelly from the gefilte fish jars. That's what we really like. Selective nostalgia. And that's what we all like to have, selective nostalgia, because it's now so yucky, and so we like to remember what it used to be like. Remember how great it was? No. It was never great. That's the thing. I challenge anyone. Whatever era, whatever decade, whatever time in history you were to insert yourself, you would recognize was muck. It always was. When? I'm not talking about touring it, right? If I told you now, right? Guess what? You get to go back. I'm taking you back, and I'm leaving you there. Where do you want to go? The good old days. You pick which good old days you want. We're going to leave you there. Yeah? I'm not talking about touring. I'm not talking about, grabbing your popcorn on a little, time travel and taking a look at Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm saying, no, we leave you there. 10 years ago, you wouldn't go. Forget about 30, 100, 1,000. You wouldn't go back 10. I'm not talking about visiting. I'm talking about you go back. You wouldn't go back 5. Because you don't realize what you would be giving up. You don't realize the developments that we've been through. And that if you take the net movement of the world is getting better, not worse. It always looks ugly. The process is always ugly. But the net developments are better. The world is getting better, not worse. And that is the movement, the source. What happens in the world, no matter how yucky it feels, is the movement of the source. That's not to say that there are not freedoms for human beings and that human beings do horrible things. I am not talking about the local details. I'm talking about the overall movements. I'm saying when you pan out and you look at the net movements of history, that is the powering of God in traditional Jewish thought. So be careful before criticizing the developments of mankind and what's going on in humanity. Don't be so sure that this is not another example of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls in the Navi, Lo mahshavotai mahshavotechem. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Lo darkechem derachai. Your ways are not my ways. I don't do things like you do. So if you were to write the script, it wouldn't read this way. Hazak Baruch. You're not writing the script. I am. And this is the way that things are moving. Bear with me. It's one of the reasons why, in terms of our Jewish faith, we are always looking forward to a history, to a future that is not done. It's not finished for us. We're always looking to see where things are going. Always on the watch to see where things are moving. That, by the way, is the manner in which the word Haredim is used in the Navi. A person who is Hared Dvar Hashem, who shakes, literally, at the word of God, recognizes you can never be sure about anything. Why? Because after all, he is, right? Like we said at the beginning, he locked himself into Brie, but there's still a tremendous amount of leeway in there. You don't know what he's thinking, where he's going, what's moving. None of us do. So what do? We watch. You know who we learn that from? Esther and Mordechai. That's why it's such an important book. That's why Hahamim say all the other books are going to go nil, except for that one. Why, that's the one where we read Mordechai, when Esther was abducted, didn't all of a sudden get all the Jews together to fast. Esther did that later on, when she realized she needed to go in. What was Mordechai doing? Mordechai was checking what's happening. Every day, Mordechai would go and watch in front of the harem what was going on. He should have just stopped and gone to pray. Go to shul, go to synagogue, and pray. How come I don't have that in the Megillah? No, he just watched. And then when he actually gets to talk to Esther, he says, Mi yodea im le'ed kazot tigata malchut. He goes, look, I have no idea, Esther, I have no idea if this is the reason why you're the queen. Who am I? I'm not God. I'm going to be so presumptuous. What I will tell you is, you have a phenomenal opportunity. Might as well take advantage of it. That is God-fearing. Why? You never know. So we're not so presumptuous. We shake at the word of God. Why? We have no idea which direction he might be going in. He can make a U-turn, which is what he does when he opens the sea. He tells him, Moshe, he goes, stop, turn back. I got a great thing planned here. Watch what I'm doing. You see, it's in the stories that we hear this, see this, understand this. What that means is that history, not just the universe itself, is expressing God's movement. So before we utterly condemn where it is that the world is going, what is happening in the world, pause and consider who's powering it all. It helps with faith. It also helps with not thinking that everything is going to Gehinnom in a handbasket. It helps us recognize that, you know what, the developments, the change in the world, the stuff that I'm not familiar with, the stuff that is tearing away the paradigms that I'm used to, reconstructing entirely new paradigms in every way, shape, and form, may not be the Antichrist. Maybe it's actually God, who in some strange ways are moving things forward. Doesn't mean that every single detail of it is desirable or even good. There may be some collateral damage that occurs as a result of it. But nonetheless, it's his world. And being that it's his world, the people in it are his people. The nature of it is his nature. So as we would assume, if it is an expression of God, studying it is getting to know God. And so people are relatively okay with saying, well, you know, you study science and you get to know God. That's really the go-to that everybody... Yeah, but what if you study the Beatles? What if you study, you know, Adele or Chance the Rapper or whatever? What if you study them? What if you study Jordan Peterson and, you know, Sam Harris? What if you study them? What? Them? Well, who made them? Was that some other God running? Or is that not part of the tapestry? Is that not part of the expression in artwork? Well, they're toxic. Maybe. Do you not have to study toxins in order to be able to know about the nature of the toxins? Isn't it sometimes true that from toxins we gain medicine? And so on and so forth. If I open myself to that, I then am not scared of where it is in the world. If I understand that that is a principle, if I understand that that is a cornerstone of my Torah, of my people, I suddenly am not scared into a corner about where it is that it's going, what is in it, and that I can engage with it. Not only that I can engage with it, I should engage with it, that I am encouraged to engage with it. Says Harambam, as halakha. Where's my Harambam? Number 14. How do you come to love God, the Maker? When you start to contemplate his works, the great and wondrous works of God, and everybody thinks, oh, that's the flowers. It is, but it's also the Beatles and Beethoven and Kierkegaard and Sartre. It's great and wondrous works. It's astonishing, really. When you study his great and wondrous works, you see from that his wisdom. I mean, the one sure place that you can have a sense, and I don't mean this in any direct way, we understand that it is an absolute paling in comparison, to say the very, very least of God's wisdom is by wise people. We say beracha on wise people. And what's the beracha? Shehalak mechochmato lebasar vadam. He gave of his wisdom to human beings, to flesh and blood. That's a beracha. That means that when I see a smart, intelligent, bright human being, creative, wise human being, I say a beracha. When I see genius, I bless. I don't say, hold on a second, can I ask you what your theological thoughts are before I say the beracha? As a matter of fact, there are two berachot. If I see a genius member of my people, I say shehalak mechuchmato lire'ah, because I assume that they are God-fearing. Yirah is reverence. I assume that they're reverent. I don't ask the Jew, if he is brilliant, are you a brilliant Jew that is reverent of God? I assume it. I don't ask. That's not halakha. So the question is, if I saw, let's say, Einstein, what would I say? Yira'ah or basar v'adam? Why shouldn't be Yira'ah? He's not a bin Brit. He's not a member of Israel. Some say, there's arguments on those details. Basar v'adam at the very least, but even if I see a genius human being, I say a beracha from God's wisdom to this person, from God's genius to that person. So Harambam is saying, you see his great and wondrous works, you love him. To know him is to love him. And how do you know him? His creative output. That's how you know him. Same way that you know all of the other artists. Lehavdil, obviously, it's analogous. But the same way, you don't feel love to the artists that move you, that show you exquisite beauty. You don't immediately have a love and affection for them, having never met them. Of course you do. So it shouldn't be that way with the ultimate one? Yes. And Harambam finishes saying, in the end, K'mo she'amru Hahamim be'inyan ahava, as the Hahamim said with regards to love, Shemitoch kach, from this, what is this? Exploring and understanding his world, ata makir et mi she'amar ve'haya olam. You come to know, you have familiarity with the one who spoke and created the world. That is a cornerstone. That, Harambam writes, see on the top, Yesodei HaTorah. Yesodei HaTorah means this is the foundations. Why is that important in a post-religious world? It's important at any point in the world. And what it tells you about post-religious is, well, God hasn't abandoned the world. We don't assume that. Torah never says that. Something might be hiding, but I have to look at it from that perspective. I have to always say that what it is that I'm seeing, what it is that I'm discovering, is not something that is contrary, but something that is expressive of God. And I need to come to know him in a different way. I'm learning things about him that I never knew before. Do you not have that experience? Is it not true that people that you've known for a long time, if you really pay attention to them, then maybe you suddenly hear things about them, learn things about them, discover things about them that you didn't know before? And not so, all the more so, to the infinite one? Look what he did this time. That helps us embrace his world. Yes, that is very Sephardi. It's been what we've always done. It's not that the Ashkenazim don't have that. They do, in some fashion. Various individuals, certain movement. It's not that it's isolated to the Sephardim, but what it is, it's ubiquitous. Especially from the Andalusia. It's always been how we've related in some way or another to the world. We've never looked at it as a distraction. And that is how some people do look at the world. Some people look at the world as an elaborate distraction. And the goal is, stay focused, don't get lost in the world. Focus on the deeds. It's just there to distract you. And what we're saying is, what Harambam is saying, what I'm suggesting, no. It's there as an elaborate expression, not a distraction. Learn about HaKadosh Baruch Hu through experiencing the world. And finally, innovation as a cornerstone. When things change, we change. We need to respond. And that is part of our berit. Getting to know God is part of the berit because it's based in love, and you want to love him and know him. But change is also part of the berit. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't simply give us a Torah and say, here's the Torah, do it. What he said is, here is the Torah that I want you to do. You determine the details. So when you have questions, you figure it out. There are principles, there are rules as to how it is that you deal with it, but you're going to have to figure it out, because I'm telling you right now, my world is changing. It always changes. You will change. I've given you a framework. I've given you a Torah, my written word, as that framework. Through those principles, you apply them. And you apply them in the best way that you know, given the terms of the world and where it is that it's going. There will be questions that come up that haven't been addressed directly. We see that in the Torah itself. What happens if Pesach comes around? It's the second Pesach ever. And all of a sudden, there's a rule that impure people are not allowed to do the Korban Pesach. And they happen to be impure. A whole bunch of people. And they come to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, are we meant to be completely left out of this whole thing? I mean, this is a major thing. This is like Korban Pesach. This is like one of the most fundamental services we do. And Moshe says, being Moshe, I'm going to go ask God. I'll ask him. We'll see. After Moshe dies, that is no longer an option. Yehoshua doesn't get to go ask God. Yehoshua, as much, Harambam says, as much as Ravina and Rav Ashi. Ravina and Rav Ashi are the last Hahamim of the Talmud. They have to look at the text and deduce, adjudicate, legislate from the text. The text is principle. How do I apply the text to the current situation? And that is the case with every single one of the mitzvot. There's not one mitzvah in the Torah that is directly actionable without our attributing how it is that we're going to put it in to legislation and law. So there's a Supreme Court, and there's a whole system of it, and so on, which I'm not going to get into now, which we don't have anymore. So people say, we can't do what the Supreme Court used to do, because we don't have one. They had tremendous leeway. They literally were able to go to the mitzvot and decide how we're going to apply these mitzvot to the current situation. And Harambam writes, psak from the Talmud, that if there was a later Bet Din that understands a mitzvah differently than a previous Bet Din, they have full authority to be able to re-legislate and reinterpret the law and how it is that it applies. We can't do that to that degree today anymore because we don't have a Supreme Court. But there is a huge amount of openness to respond with what it is that we've got intact still. And if we are going to be responsive, and if we are going to take the world seriously, and we are going to look at it not as an elaborate distraction, but as an elaborate expression, if we're going to look at history as the development of God, then we need to go along with it. And going along with it doesn't mean hunkering down and creating some artificial structure of behavior that has nothing to do with where it is that the world is going. We have to do that to the greatest degree that we have capacity. Why? That's Bible. Otherwise it's saying, I'm not interested in moving along with God's world. I'm interested in moving along with my world. The world that I've created. That's not covenant. It's not covenant. It's not viable. And it no longer is dynamic and part of a living breed. Where is the source for that? Rambam writes, these I want to read with you. I recognize the time. I'm going to take 5 minutes. Are we good with 5 minutes? You're going to tell me no? Or you're just going to hate me under your breath and say, I can't believe that you went 5 minutes. I get that. Well, I'm sorry. It doesn't happen all the time. Will be 5. Harambam writes in the Teshuvah, mentioned in the Gerot, he says, אני יודע שאפשר שתחפשו ותמצאו דברי יחידים לחכמי האמת רבותינו עליהם השלום. Here Harambam is talking about the influence of the stars on our lives. Astrological effects of constellations on life. He says, look, I know that you will be able to look and see even our own Hahamim. Aleim Shalom, peace be upon them. In the Talmud, in the Mishnah, in the Midrashot, שדבריהם מראים שבעת תולדותו של אדם גרמו הכוכבים כך וכך, that when a person is born, this constellation of stars affected them in a particular way. You will see that they speak about this in the Talmud. אל יקשה זה בעיניכם, it shouldn't be difficult for you. שאין דרך שנניח הלכה למעשה ונהדר הפרחה והשינויה. First of all, we're not going to throw out halacha l'maaseh because of these things that we hear spoken about. But more importantly, en rawi le'adam le'aniach devarim shel da'at. It is not fitting for a person to leave things that are intelligible and reasonable, that make sense to a person. Shekvar nit'amtu ha're'ayot bahen, that the proofs to them have been proven and made true over and over again, that we see that they're true. We can reproduce them that they're so true. We can predict because we know it so well. And then when he knows these things, shake his hands of them, wipe his hands of them, and instead insist that because one of the Hahamim said something that is contrary to this whole evidence and data that we see as being absolutely real and true and proven as such, that we should throw it all out because one Hacham said something that doesn't jive with it. You don't throw out an entire corpus of reason and proof because of that. It's possible that the Hacham didn't see this. Didn't know it. It was concealed. Either at that time, or or maybe he says something in those words hinting to something else. You have to look carefully, but you don't just throw out all reason and proven truths because of it. That's Harambam. You have to take that into consideration. Hahamim say, you know why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed? The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because the Hahamim were rigid in their judgments. They refused to respond and move from the letter of the law. Take a look. You have to watch the law that they should do. It says that they should veer from the letter of the law, or from the line of judgment. Amar Rabbi Yohanan says, you know why Jerusalem was destroyed? Because they judged judgment of Torah without moving, without veering. That should be the reason why Yerushalayim was established, not the reason why it was destroyed. No. They were too rigid. They didn't respond to the variations that were going on. Rather, they kept everything according to the din of Torah, and they didn't veer from what was needed and where things were going. Astonishing. Rav Kook, he's not a Sephardi. But in this line, he quotes two Sephardim. I don't know if I put it in here for you, but he writes this Nebuchei Ador. Nebuchei Ador literally means to the perplexed of the generation, which he was very worried about. He was very worried about the younger members of the generation. This is going back almost 100 years. He quotes the Rasag, Rabbeinu Sa'adia Gaon Harambam, and he says, look, I'm going to tell it to you frankly. Chovat Chachmei Dorenu Hamitiyim, it is the obligation of the true Hachamim of our time. If they're real Hachamim, this is an obligation to them. Latzet Berkavot Rabotenu Rishonim, to follow the earlier Hachamim, and Lid'og Be'ad Nebuchim, and to pay attention and worry about those who are confused about our Torah, about our people, about our whole way. Ularchiv Yediatam, they need to expand their knowledge. B'matzav ha'chochmot, in what way? In the current wisdoms. The Hachamim need to know what the heck is going on in the world. The Hachamim need to know what's being spoken, studied, taught. What are the discoveries in the world? They need to know this. All the new explorations and examinations that are happening. And to show how it is that the principles and framework of Torah recognize those things. If Torah is a framework rather than dogma, if the Torah is principles rather than preconceived solutions, then it should be able to respond to everything that comes into the world, because if what we're saying is true, that it is the mode of our covenant with God, and history is the movement of God, and the world is the expression of God, then what happens in it should not fail to be able to be recognized and seen through the lens of the Torah. So he's saying, Hahamim that are genuine Hahamim of Torah, that's their responsibility to teach us. How do I apply Torah to where it is that the world is going in terms of where it is that God's moving it? Further he says, Al ken tzarich le'avi kol darkei ha'ora'ah shel zikuch ha'de'ot. Therefore we have to bring all modes of teaching, ruling in law, development of ideas, to clarity of thought. It needs to be clean. It needs to be clear. They have to be able to know and see their wisdom of Torah in light of all of the new discoveries that are going on in the world. And that is not by simply rejecting them out of hand. First, understand them. Understand them. To understand them is to understand the works of God. Leman yada dorenu. Why? So that our generation should know how to get out of all of our perplexities. We should be able to have clarity about how it is that our Torah embraces God's world in every generation and in every way. Liot shalem b'emunat Torah Hashem, so that we can be whole in our faithfulness to the Torah of God. Hatemimah, which is whole. We have to give our hands to all the new disciplines in all of their details. And he says, in the developments of this, he goes, it's not going to be easy. You got to work. You have to sweat to do this. I quoted some nice lines. Rav Steinsaltz, alav hashalom. Torah that's not a living framework for action is no longer Torah. That's a very bold statement. But based on what we're saying, understandable. Rav Moshe Shmuel Glasner, also not a Sephardi. He called his book the Dor Revi'i, fourth generation, because he was the fourth generation from the Hatam Sofer. He writes in his introduction to his commentaries on Masechet Hulin, the interpretation of this in Hebrew, I translated. The interpretation of the written Torah was given into the respective hands of every generation, so that the Torah would remain alive and develop with the nation. It was succinct, so I put it in. I gave a whole shiur twice in a teshuvah from Rabbi Haim David Halevi, Sephardi, very famous chief rabbi of Tel Aviv in the late 20th century, and where he iterates clearly over and over again how important it is, how essential it is, how it is the core of our viability to respond and innovate in law and Torah as per the developments of the world. And that is the meaning of Torah. It's how Torah is meant to be. If you'd like to hear that shiur, check out the Haburah. It's a plug, shamelessly. Because what the Haburah is doing is presenting frameworks, perspectives, ways of thought.